got a hit. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Triple F Shooting. Today we're going to be looking at one of my favorite rifles just for the oddity of it and the historical value, the 1865 Spencer. Now this rifle, not this exact one, this is a replica made by Chiappa out of Italy, which again, thank you Italians for making all these really cool kind of old Western historical guns. This one is an 1865. Originally, the first model that came out would have been the 1860, and there's just a few differences between the two. We'll get into that toward the end of the video. For now, what we're going to do is just look at it from the end of the barrel to the butt of the stock, go through some of the highlights of what makes this rifle its own kind of special thing, and then we're going to go out and do some testing and shooting with it just to get the video moving. So, first thing we're going to do, this is an odd rifle to clear, but it's going to be really difficult to show you that there's nothing in it because kind of the whole action falls away. So you can see there that there's no bullet laying in the top or anything like that, but you have a 20-inch fairly heavy profile barrel. Now this replica is in 45 Colt. You can buy them in 5650 Spencer. I just did not want to go to the trouble of reloading that, sourcing that ammo. All the brass is still available to do it, but you are going to have to reload it yourself. There is no, as far as I know, 5650 ammo being made. Buffalo Arms might be able to help you out there, but I'm sure it's expensive. So 45 Colt it was for me because I already have some other guns in that caliber. So barrel's 20 inches like stated. It's not crazy heavy, but it's pretty thick. You do have a, I think it's Patridge or Partridge style front sight where it's very squared off. Originals, I believe, were going to be like a brass blade, shark fin looking thing. You do have a single barrel band keeping your forearm closely attached to the barrel. You do also have a screw underneath here locking everything down. The rear sight is sort of hilariously optimistic. It goes all the way out to 900 yards at the very top little cutout. In 45 Colt, you're not going to do that. If you can, I would love to see a video of it. That'd be very cool. But you have a slider here for your yardage. It is windage adjustable by just knocking it back and forth, punching it back and forth. And a leaf spring is what's keeping all this kind of tight and set. One really cool feature that they threw in for you is the, I'll throw a picture up, but you'll never be able to see it from there. The patent markings are right across the top of the receiver here. Very cool that they threw that in there. It is just a little bit different than an original, but looks very close, so it's a very neat add-on feature. You can see that the receiver is a beautiful case color harden. Most likely that's done with a chemical. There are not many companies that go to the trouble of actual like bone and charcoal case hardening to get that pretty blue, but nonetheless, this is a gorgeous gun. The wood's very pretty. All the metal finish is very pretty and case hardened, so absolutely beautiful gun to look at. The receiver itself is kind of an odd shape, as you can tell. It has this funny little teardrop, and that is what's kind of containing the only real bolt that's holding the whole mechanism in the receiver. So very cool, very simple kind of takedown. Once you get inside the guts of it, it's not quite as simple, but not a terribly convoluted action. You can see that the trigger guard is also my lever. As you saw when I cleared the thing, it has a rolling block kind of action where you're rotating out of the way, and then we are going to load the next round. The hammer on the thing is a musket style affair where when I run the lever, it does not cock the hammer for me. I have to reach up and cock the hammer to shoot it. We'll get to that in the firing sequence. The stock itself is fairly chunky, and that is because the rounds are actually loaded through the backside of the butt, similar to some .22 rifles. There are other rifles throughout history in modern day that do that still, but this one is fairly odd. It's pretty neat to load, but definitely nothing like a modern firearm or even an older lever action where you're going through a side gate or even up front on the Henrys. So you do have a saddle ring because nothing is new, and they actually did have single point tactical slings back in the 1860s for cavalry guys. So very cool addition there. Going down through the stock, it's very pretty. Simple piece of wood, very simple cut, not terribly rounded off, almost kind of a boat paddle shape. You do have a rear sling swivel, which to me doesn't make a ton of sense because I don't have any way to attach up front unless I add it myself. A Spencer rifle would have had sling swivels up front too, so that is most likely why it's there. It's the same stock as the rifle would have. You have a case hardened butt plate, and you can see there I have a very strange little tab. And that is my spring tube, or my magazine tube. Much like a 22 long rifle where your rounds are actually filling up this spring and you have a follower pushing them in, you can see the gun is very hollow through the stock. There's a tube running up into the receiver, and that's how this thing feeds. So without getting any more deep of me just sitting in here talking, let's go out to the range and show off a firing sequence. Oh, before I forget, when we do the firing sequence, one very cool piece of history that we're going to look at is the Blakesley box. We'll get more in depth on it toward the end, but you will get to see this in that firing sequence. So before you're just like, what the crap is that hanging off its side? This is a leather wrapped, basically chunk of wood with holes drilled through it containing essentially tubular speed loaders. So these are made of tin. They hold 7 rounds of ammunition, and we'll show you how it works. All right, guys, we're out on the range with the Spencer Carbine, the 1865. We're gonna go through how this thing's loaded really quick from a Blakesley box. Now, of course, you could just individually throw rounds in it, but has a very strange, or at least compared by modern standards, way of loading. So the first thing we're gonna do is turn this flap, or whatever you want to call that tang to the side off its detent. I'm going to pull it. Now here's my problem. I have to do something with this. So what I'm going to try to do is just kind of force it in half my pocket there. People had pockets in the 1860s, so I could do that, right? Now, my Blakesley box is attached by a strap and belt. You can see I have these tubes full of bullets. These are made of tin, so they're really tender and fragile. So I'm going to pull this tube. It is just in a block made of wood with holes drilled in it. I have my tinned tube with my 7 rounds. 7's important, that's all this thing holds. I'm going to put the gun on an angle. And I am now loaded with 7 rounds. I'm going to put my tube back in the box, close her up so I don't dump all my other ammo and everybody has a bunch of bullets on the ground. Retrieve my spring tube, much like a 22 long rifle. Most everybody's used to that. It has to go in on that 90-degree angle. And I'm going to close it, and it's going to catch the detent. So now I have a stock full of bullets. You can tell that the stock is fairly wide to accommodate all that. So when you're gripping the thing, it's a pretty chunky grip compared to the forearm, which is quite a bit thinner. But it puts quite a bit of the weight in your shoulder, so this is a very light and handy feeling firearm. Now the actual firing process is also kind of odd. So we don't have a round chambered yet. You have what looks like a trigger guard is also your lever, much like a Sharps rifle. So what I'm going to have to do is grab a hold of that thing, crank it down. I'm going to put this big giant chunky hammer in half cock first. So I'm going to let you get over on my side and I'll kind of show that off. Okay, so I'm going to go to half cock, get my hammer out the way. I'm going to grab a hold of my lever. I usually just use like a thumb and forefinger grip down here low. Crank it all the way open with a little bit of authority. And depending upon the style of cartridge, your length and everything like that, you may have to wiggle as you just saw me do, but I do have my round started into the chamber. I'm going to go ahead and finish that off. So now we're loaded, full cock, and now we shoot. And you'll see this great big hammer drop. Now this thing is just chambered in 45 Colt, so recoil's not so bad. Now, loading successive rounds is also not quite as smooth as you'd see in like an 1860 Henry or any Winchester up to 1873. So what I'm going to do is repeat the process. This time I'm just going to go to full cock, I'm gonna grab this lever and crank her open with authority again, hoping to grab that 45 Colt case head. Worked real good. Give her a jiggle and I'm reloaded. Okay, so that time I missed. And I had to pry that out. Luckily I could get it out with my fingernail. So you heard the next round come into play. There we go. Now we're gonna come up. Sometimes you get one kind of hung up and it'll shake loose. Let's go for a far one, see if you can hear the difference between the round leaving and hitting. Nope, because I missed because I suck. I got a ram target out there at quite a ways. We are stuck. May have to get my knife on this one. But you can see that the action is trying to get a hold of that, and we're just kind of stuck in there. There's the focus. So again, we are just a little bit finicky as far as your modern lever actions would go. So I'm going to take a second, get this out, use probably a pocket knife to just prick it loose, and we'll see where we go from there. And that is empty. So of course we had a jam up with one round left in the gun, but that happens with 45 Colt, especially in these kind of firearms. They have a very small rim. I was able to just take a pocket knife and slip the thing out, no big deal. But for the time period, being able to do that, as cumbersome as that looked, was a huge advancement. So to better explain why this thing is so cool, we're going to do a little bit of a demo here in a second. Okay, so as you can see, the Spencer is a little bit cumbersome to load. Still, in 1860 when this thing came out and when the Union Army actually picked it up, this was an enormous advancement in firepower. Before that, you had a front stuffing muzzleloader. There were other cartridge guns at the time using copper and rubber and just standard breech loading, still using paper cartridges and things like that. But this was kind of one of the major self-contained metallic cartridge firing guns of the time, or at least it's the one that was picked up by the military. We will also on the channel look at an 1860 Henry and do a comparison of that, but there's a ton of videos out there on that. So what we're going to do is compare this directly to a musket that would have had similar features for technology at that time. The one that we have on hand is an 1863 Remington contract rifle pattern, so those were actually not really issued in any great number, if at all. They were made, and I don't believe they were delivered until toward the end of the war, and were mostly unnecessary at the time. So it's controversial if any of them ever entered combat, but we don't really care because all we're doing is displaying the function of the rifle, and it is very similar to anything else at that time. So let's get back out to the range and demonstrate just how much of an advancement this Spencer carbine was. Now, this is not a rifle that was, well, it's controversial, but most likely not used in the Civil War, but all the same tech. This is an 1863 Remington contract rifle. They made a few thousand of these. I'll throw the actual number up. Can't remember right off the top of my head. But same style of firearm and technology that was being used at the time. So it was using a, if you like French words, a Meunier ball, or what we call a mini ball, being rammed down the front end of the barrel of the muzzle load, and then we're coming back up, going to half or full cock, and putting a primer cap on. Now, I am not wearing correct Civil War period gear right now. I just have this possibles bag that I have a few cartridges made up in, and I am going to be using a capper, which is not correct for the time period. They would have had a small box somewhere on their belt that they would have just pulled a cap from and put it on there. So what I'm going to do before we like immediately compare those things, I'm going to practice load a couple of these cartridges because I haven't really messed with them yet, and they are the tear off and pour style. They are not just like a ram the whole thing down there. So I'm gonna let you watch me fumble around a little bit, so let's get started. Okay, so I have my possibles bag. Again, I should have an actual cartridge box if I was going Civil War replica, but I don't. So this is a paper cartridge. This is loaded with 60 grains of black powder. You can tell my top's already kind of coming apart as I pulled it out a couple times earlier. But what I'm gonna have to do is tear this thing off up here at the top, pour the powder down into the muzzle, and then turn this thing over and kind of push the mini ball out and into the barrel. No paper, at least with this specific type, is supposed to go in the barrel. I believe there are other types that use like a cigarette paper or something like that where the whole thing can actually go in, which would be a much faster reload. But this is what I got on me to kind of approximate. So let's tear this off. Cool, I'll put that in my pocket so as not to litter. I'm a good fit of thin. All right, pour my powder. Hopefully you can see that. I'm desperately trying not to, I'm gonna do this a whole lot faster later. I'm trying not to lose any. All right, so there's my powder. Now I'm gonna kind of pinch. Well, we might just do it like this. That guy's glued in there pretty good. So that's why we're doing this once before, so I have a better understanding of how. So I'm gonna get him started. So as you can see, that looked a lot easier than most of your muzzleloader reloads because that mini ball is undersized with a hollow lead skirt. And I'll get some pictures up close so you can see it better. But it's meant to go down the bore very easily. So I'm gonna put my ramrod, give her a couple hard packs. Come back up, place my ramrod. And now this is the part also is going to be a little different. So I have this capper, which is loaded with a bunch of musket caps. So I'm going to come to full cock. I'm going to put a cap on the nipple. Seat it, and now I'm ready to fire. So I'm gonna set up here, pick a target, and make a whole bunch of smoke. Here we go. I'm gonna wait for a second. Had plenty of powder in there. Nothing lit, so I could have bad powder. All right. Get that cap off. Go off though. We got ignition. All right, guys, so what we're gonna do, if the gun will let me and if my skill will let me, I'm gonna try to put 3 rounds down timed and just see how long that takes me with this rifle to do it. Maybe faster to use my loose powder with the powder throw, because that cartridge was fairly painful for me. So we're gonna see if I do that any better. I'm gonna put it to a time, shoot 3 rounds, and then we'll do the same thing with Spencer. So here we go. Dun, dun, dun. Oh God. Alright, we're just gonna tear it away and go for the bullet. There we go. Could not get it to push free of that paper. I think the wax is holding her up. I can't even imagine what we're at right now. It's probably like 40 minutes. I feel like a cartridge box or just a regular cap box would be faster. All right, we got a hit. All right, cartridge number 2. All right, that went much better. We're getting better with practice, just like all your coaches told you in school. All right, I lied. It's not getting better. That wax is something. It's one way to get the paper off. I was also a baton twirler in high school. Come on now. That works. We are currently at like 2 minutes. Yeah, there's no getting that thing out with all the wax on it. Which the lube is good, it's supposed to be, but the paper is very stuck. I'll pick that up in a minute, I promise. Watch my capper be the reason I die. Okay, last round. Okay, as fun as that was, they say a good rifleman back then could get 3 rounds off in a minute. Well, I can get 1 round off per minute, so that was pretty bad. But, you know, if I'm just some random conscript, that may be my skill level, so that was that. Bleh. You know what? I got 1 more round. Why not make you suffer through it? Better close that off though, so I don't dump powder everywhere. Oh, let's go for the ram. Can't hit the ram today. But you can see I have fired 4 rounds and this thing is filthy. That's more black powder than it is this tech. You know, muzzleloaders are kind of inherently dirty because they're usually shooting black powder, but let's get out the other gun. Okay, now we are one of the lucky soldiers who got issued a Spencer in our Blakesley box and all that good stuff. So what we're gonna do is the exact same thing. I'm gonna start with an empty gun, load, and fire 3 rounds and see what kind of time difference there is. So here we go. Okay. Find my pocket. Okay, well there went like 8 seconds on my pocket. I gotta do something with the tube. So that was 43 seconds to get the 3 rounds off with a full load of 7 rounds. So I still have the ability to fire 4 more rounds. So I probably could get, you know, without the load, I could probably get all 7 rounds off in somewhere around 15 seconds. In fact, let's just try that. Okay, so we're going to attempt a 7 rounds as fast as I can and see what kind of time we get. duct case. So that was 35 seconds. I had quite a few hang-ups. Alright guys, so hopefully that wasn't too difficult to tell the difference between having 7 rounds of self-contained metallic cartridges able to fire as fast as you can run this action and having a front stuffing muzzleloader. Now again, the cartridges that I had, which are very cool packaging and everything. You can see that there. These came wrapped up in twine and the rounds are inside with instructions on how to use them and everything. This is Jefferson Arsenal. They make rounds for pistols, rifles, quite a few different things. I would definitely check them out if you are into this, because when I stumbled on them, I was just kind of like a kid in a candy store looking through everything, even at rounds I don't have or the ability to shoot. So very cool website. He makes a really cool product. Now in the instructions on his stuff, it just like spells out deliberately, do not put paper in the gun. Now my understanding of cartridges at that time was that either they existed or were the majority where the whole piece of paper was made out of some kind of a flash paper, cigarette paper kind of stuff that the primer could burn through and would still ignite your cartridge. So my reloads on that 1863 pattern rifle were way slower than they should have been, historically speaking. From what I've seen in different historical documents, things like that, you kind of could take the whole cartridge, ram it down the barrel, put your cap on and shoot the gun. So that would have sped up considerably. At the time, again, it was 3 rounds per minute. Even with that being a benefit, this thing beats it hands down. There is no way to fight against something that you can get 7 rounds of metallic cartridges in, that you can just keep repeating those rounds off and then reload off something like a Blakesley box, or even if you're reloading out of a bag, just individual rounds. You could put 7 rounds in the gun almost as fast as you could load 1 round in your muzzleloader. So enormous game changer for the Civil War battlefield. This rifle came into being, believe it or not, it's called a Spencer rifle because it was designed by a guy named Spencer, last name anyway. He was an inventor and tinkerer. He apparently even built his own like steam-powered wagon that people didn't like because it scared off horses when he'd drive it into town and things like that. So he developed this rifle, took it to Lincoln because he believed it could be a huge advance, and had to keep pressing and pressing and pressing until he eventually got this thing in front of Abraham Lincoln and let him fire it, as far as I know, on the like front lawn of the White House, when you could do that back then. So he was terribly impressed with it. They ordered quite a few of them, and quite a few of them made it into combat. Now, the 1860 was chambered in 56-56. That is contrary to anything that we use now for caliber naming or anything like that. It is not caliber over powder or anything like that. I believe it was something to do with the actual powder charge and then the case head measurement. So the round itself was not 56 caliber. That round would be fairly successful, but in 1865 they would come out with the 56-50. When they did that, the 1865 rifle came out. Sorry, I had to go back and check my notes because there is so much oddity around the 56-56 and 56-50, but the main difference between the two is that the 56-56 actually had a 52 bore, and the 56-50 was a little bit elongated, covered up your lube rings. So instead of, sort of like when we talked about the American top break revolver, those rounds would have had exposed lube rings and a heel tight bullet, and then later would be transferred over to 44 Russian and all that crap. Well, we have a similar instance with this gun. I'll throw a picture where the 56-56 has exposed lube rings, which can become a problem, and then the 56-50, we get a little bit longer. We go to a slightly smaller 50 caliber bore on the barrel, and we crimp over those lube rings so you have a more modern looking cartridge. Other than the barrel length changing on the 1860 to the 1865 by 2 inches, we shortened up just a little bit on the 65. There weren't a huge amount of differences. In fact, the older guns could actually chamber the new ammo, whereas the new guns couldn't chamber the old. So you had some logistical issues going on there, but for all intents and purposes, very similar rifle, or carbine as it were. The rifles actually stayed the same 30-inch barrel and all that good stuff. After the war, even another caliber would come along, and I'm not going to get into it to convolute this even further, but these rifles did not last terribly long after the Civil War. They made it up sometime into the 1870s, where they were pretty quickly replaced with the trapdoor rifle that most people are fully aware of. At some point we'll get one of those on the channel, but these did get into the hands of civilians quite often as they were surplused out. InRange has a very cool video called Surplus in the 1870s, and he's using one of these and does a really good job of explaining how that would have come about. But there are many different reports in battles, as well as in civilian hands or frontiersmen, things like that, in the late 1860s, early 1870s, where these rifles proved to be invaluable in warding off enemies, attacking natives, what have you. Very small groups of people armed with things like Spencers and Henrys could hold off overwhelming odds, given they didn't have the same firepower. So being able to go to that 7-round repeating action, again, the overall theme of this whole video was enormous. But without getting too much deeper into all the history, I am going to kind of take this thing apart for you on, probably just do it in pictures while I'm talking here, but what you'll be able to see is that the action is all held together on one shoulder bolt at the bottom of this teardrop shape, and when you remove that, you get the whole action, lever and all, to come out, and you can kind of see how that thing works. It has a very cool action block that works off of a spring load, and as you open the gun, you actually pull the action block down on the plunger that you can see there to get it out of the way. It is basically held in place by a trough that's cut into the action block that stops on the frame of the gun. A round comes out of the bottom of the magazine tube and is then forced up and into the action, rolling on that block. Now, as you saw in the video of loading, it is not always the smoothest thing, depends on your round and your sizing and everything. But very, very cool rifle. I'll throw those pictures in there so you can kind of see what the guts of this thing look like without trying to fumble around with me one-handed on the camera. But without further ado, we will put this rifle up against an 1860 Henry eventually and give you some good looks at what the comparisons and contrasts were there, because that was also available in the Civil War. The military did not buy it, but a lot of individual troops would go out and purchase the thing and use it to great effect. So we'll show those two combined, but very cool gun. Chiappa did an excellent job. The quality, the fit and finish is absolutely gorgeous, and when it's working smoothly, it's awesome. When it's finicky, it's probably not too far off of the original. So very cool gun. These are not very easy to find. This was the first one in quite a few years that I saw on Gunbroker when I picked it up a while back, but it's not like I was actively searching for years at a time. It's just something I stumbled upon that I've been looking for a while. Kind of rare here, but if you can get your hands on one and you're into this kind of thing, it is a no-brainer. You will not be sorry. This is an extremely cool piece of history, a very beautiful, even if all you do is look at it, very beautiful rifle, and an excellent conversation piece at the very least. So thanks for watching Triple F Shooting. We will see you guys in the next video. Appreciate you. Full cock helps.